66. I've been a sculptor since 1967, I guess. But Dennis asked me if I'd maybe do a little slideshow. I said, why don't you get your cousin Gary Westergren to come over and do a show on horses, and I told Cammie that. She said, well, I'll go to your reunion if he does a show on horses. But if you're doing a slideshow on your stuff, I don't need to see that. So, anyway, I thought I'd just show you some work that I've done the last 50 years and tell you about some of the people that I've done pieces for, and some of the people I've done some of my subjects. Since we're here talking about people, that was me.
Bruce, if I'm in your way, I can move over.
That's Dennis, I'm talking. Be quiet. Now he's going to be mad the rest of the night. Okay, here we go. This is me about 50 years ago. Started up my first foundry at Hastings College, and that's me. I should have worn those glasses tonight. This is a piece called The Last Laugh. I did a portrait of a guy named Henry Moore. He was a sculptor from England, and I had him hanging around my studio for a couple of years, and finally a friend of mine came by and put a nose on him and said he'd make a pretty good clown, so I made him into a clown and called it The Last Laugh. This is one called The Flatlander, and the inspiration from this came from just people around here. When I first thought of myself as somebody that could draw, I remember I was very, very young, and I don't know. I wrote a little thing about it last year and put it on Facebook. My secretary, I wrote a note one day. Said I got some 3B pencils, and I just wrote a little article, and so she typed it up, put it on Facebook, and I got a lot of hits. But it was about a kid that I knew in 3rd grade that was a terrific draftsman. And I remember watching him draw, and I remember I thought that he had a magic pencil, and sure enough he did. It was a 3B pencil, which is a very soft-leaded pencil, and it was Darrell Landstrom. And so we used to get together and draw, and I remember going down to Hested's and buying a 3B pencil, and it cost 25 cents. And back then, I think a number 2 pencil was about 3 cents. So it was a pretty good treasure for me. Anyway, and when I got that 3B pencil, I thought a lot about Darrell, and of course, you know, Darrell made it with us until about the 6th grade, I think. And then he took himself out. This is Prairie Flowers. This is a piece I did. I had 3 wonderful models for that before I got married. I could have models for those. This is what I did for the University of Pennsylvania. It's Ben Franklin. I'm going to go through these pretty quick, unless you all have any questions. I've seen most of these before. This one's called Hearts on a Swing. The very first one I did was over there. That one was done in about 1979. This one I did in about 1986, 87. And at that time, my brother had hired this pretty little gal to work with him in his mold making department. So I hired her to be the model for me on this piece. And so she came up and modeled for me on this. We got to know each other. And next thing you know, we've been married now for 32 years. Her name's Cammie. She was supposed to be here, but she's in a mule school. Mule school. This piece is called Departure. This was the first life-size piece I ever did. I had drawn a picture of 2 kids in the Rome train station when I was living in Italy, and I was down at Texas A&M a few years later thumbing through my sketches, and I found that sketch, and I thought, well, that'd make a kind of a neat piece. So I did a small piece that was pretty popular, So I was getting ready for a big show, and I thought I needed a big piece, so I did that piece, and it was called Departure. I had my younger brother Mark model for that, and one of the girls he knew came over too. I wish I could remember her name. And of course, here's a piece that's out here in the park, Promise of the Prairie. This piece came about because we had our 100th-year centennial here in Holdridge. Centennial for you people in Holdridge means 100 years. I learned that when I had this commission. But they called me the first time, and I think they originally were talking about a portrait of, I think it was John Holdridge. Anyway, George Holdridge. Anyway, I don't think anybody knew who George Holdridge was. So I went to the foundation. I had my brother Swan helping me out, and Brad Pearson. And we went to the foundation. I told the foundation, why don't we do the people that built the area? And so I did a small model of it about that size, brought it to the foundation, and they said, well, this is going to be really expensive. And I said, yeah, it's about $60,000. And they said, well, how do we raise the money? I said, well, maybe we make some small ones and sell them and, make up some money.
Or they said maybe you reduced your price. Oh, I don't think so. Pencils are expensive. They used to be a quarter, and now they're like 80 cents.
We've been practicing this for 65 years. Anyway, they sold enough small ones in about a month, I think, didn't they, Swanee, to pretty much pay for the whole thing, which was
Yes.
pretty cool.
A lot of people here probably have one.
Oh, I've got some more, don't worry. Actually, we don't. This one is called the Joy of Music, and there's one of these over in the tassel. We'll maybe see that tomorrow. But my younger brother Nelson's wife is the flute player. My son Eric is one of the singers. My little niece Adrian is the other singer. A friend of mine, Danny Ostermiller, wildlife sculptor, is a violin player. And I couldn't find a good-looking bass player, so I did myself. This one I did for a guy that called one day. He said he needed a piece for his shoe store. So I told him what it would cost and how big it was going to be. And I said, well, that's pretty expensive for a shoe store. I said, what's the name of your shoe store? He said, it's called Nike. I said, and who are you? He said, my name's Phil Knight, but you can call me Buck. I said, okay, Buck. And so I ended up doing a couple of sculptures for Buck. This one called the Valentine, and this one called the Nike Girl. And they're in Beaverton, Oregon. And I guess the most fun I had on this trip was I was lucky enough to find Kim Johnson's address and telephone number. And so on my way out there, I called Kim, and I said, Kim, you wanna go to the dinner with me? He said, sure. And so he was out there. He was preaching on the street at the time. And so he came to the dinner, and we sat down with Phil Knight. There must have been 500 people at the opening of his big new campus there. And I think Kim knew about every sports star that was in there. And he was sitting right next to Bolitnikoff and another guy named Page that was played for the Vikings, Alan Page. And of course, Kim knew everybody. And I'm sorry Kim couldn't make it, but I wish he could. Am I supposed to go faster, Lindsay?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. This one's called the Valentine. This one I did for Coors Field when they opened up the new Coors Field in Denver for the Rockies. And you can see him once in a while. If we just had the All-Star game there. And of course, they always show the statue out in front, but they never seem to put my name on it. This one I did for Mary Lanning Hospital over in Hastings. This one I got a kick out of it because I met this guy. I used to give sculptures to the Channel whatever the educational channel number is here in Lincoln. And every year they would sell it at their auction, online auction thing. And every year my collectors would call me and say, hey, I thought I put in the last bid and they told me that I didn't get the piece. So after about 3 years, I finally wrote them a letter and said, somebody's cheating and not letting these people bid. And I got a call from this guy, and this guy said, I understand you called me a SOB on your letter and sent it to all the board members of the channel, whatever it was, auction. And I said, well, if the shoe fits, wear it. And I said, who are you? He said, my name's Cliff Hilligus. And he said, yeah, my wife was running the auction every year. She likes her work, so she wouldn't bid until the last one after they shut off the bidding, then she would bid and buy the piece. So he said, what we'd like to do is buy a piece from you every year and we'll donate it to the auction. I thought that was a good deal. But then he became one of the movers and shakers over in Kearney at the museum. So the museum called me and asked me one day if I'd do a statue of Cliff for the museum. So this is Cliff Hilligus, and you all know him because he was a fellow who started Cliff's Notes, and he saved me because you know I think he saved a lot of us. I wasn't the best reader in the world. This is another one. This one I did originally for Beatrice. I did this one, another one called Storybooks, and both of them were library-related pieces. My subject here was a little boy that used to walk by my studio every day, and he was Down syndrome, and he'd leave his mother's house, and I think he worked at the Dairy Queen or somewhere like that. So I told him one day, I said, hey, Danny, you want to come over and model for me? And he said, sure. So I had my 2 kids. They were that age at this time, so I had them all come up for about a week at a time, and when Danny finally got done, I gave him a couple $100 cash for modeling for me. And his mother called me the next day and asked me if Danny had stolen some money from me. I said, no, he was my model. And she said, really? He didn't say anything about it. So she came over, and I said, Danny, I said, go over there and show your mom what you were doing. And he was a perfect model. He would sit down and get in exactly the same thing and not move. If you told him not to move, he wouldn't move for 45 minutes. He was a neat kid. Still is a neat kid. This is one we did for the New Denver Airport, a guy named Elroy Jeppesen. I'm getting some feedback from, not just from Westergren, but from the PA. Anyway, this is what I did of Jeff. I didn't know I was going to get this commission because my secretary just thrown some slides in an envelope and sent them down to Denver. And then I got a call one day from this guy, and he said, "There's George Lundeen." I said, "Yeah." He said, "My name's Elroy Jeppesen, and I understand you have the commission to do me for the New Denver Airport." And I said, "Well, who are you?" And he then told me that he was the guy that started airline navigation. So every pilot in the world that's ever flown flies with Jet charts. Anyway, Jeff, at that time he was about 85 years old, so he used to come up and help me work on the piece when I was working on it. If you guys have any questions, just raise your hands and I'll ignore you. This is just a quick piece I did off of the other one called Departure. I just called this one Study for Departure. Sometimes when you sell out of a piece, it's nice to be able to make a few more of them. This is called Two Springers. Once in a while I get into some wildlife. This is one I think you've probably seen it. We have the big one here in front of the courthouse. It's called Field of Blue. And my model for this one was my secretary's little son. That's Thomas Jefferson. We're getting a couple of those back now because several universities are pulling him off campus. And so they decided, I think, that Thomas Jefferson wasn't the greatest guy to make into a sculptor.
So George, will you resell those?
You wanna buy them? No, they don't actually give them back to me. They usually put them somewhere else. There was one school that had down in Kansas, had a Ben Franklin and a Thomas Jefferson, so they just got rid of both of them. And they sent them up to a school in North Dakota that decided they still like it. It's a tough one. I see both sides of that story. This is a guy named Jack Swagger. He was an astronaut, came out of Denver. We did this for the Capitol building in Washington. So if you ever go to the Capitol building in Washington, you'll see him. I wasn't any better than this when I was teaching art history. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. Look closer. There we go. There's Jack. Corliss. You got a loop going.
What happened to you?
Oh, here we go. Okay.
Caught the loop there, Rebecca.
No, it does it on its own. Oh, I'm touching that.
Yeah, I think.
I'm touching the pad. Corliss, I'm just doing the arrows, okay?
Hey, George, do you still have a spacesuit in your studio?
No, we had to give the spacesuit back, Dennis. When we did Jack Swagger, they did send us one of the original Apollo spacesuits. I later found out that those spacesuits go for about $1 million now.
So at that point, George took his off. And put it on eBay.
I wish we would have. Anyway, that was Jack Swagger. There we go. We later did some more. These are the first American astronauts that went out west, Lewis and Clark. And this piece is out in front of the, what's the name of the museum in Lincoln? It's across from the Lead Center. Yeah.
Sheldon?
It's not. No, it's named after somebody else. But I'll think. Anyway, Lewis and Clark. This is just one called "Wait for an Answer." An old friend of mine owned a company called Leaning Tree Cards out of Boulder, and he asked me if I'd do a piece for him sometime. So I did this one, and just an old cowboy waiting for an answer. This
So
was
you
called-
can retitle that Calvin checking his email.
That's a good idea. This one's called Old Friends. This was just an idea I had. I did another sketch when I was living in Italy of an old guy feeding pigeons out on the square in Florence. Came back and did him a few years later. This one is a couple that older lady came and asked me if I'd do a sculpture of her parents for Loveland, and they were in Loveland in the 20s and 30s and built homes, and it's just called Hometown. We put it right across the street from the little house that she grew up in. And these are the Shields pieces. If you've been to a Shields store, you'll see some of the stuff we do for a guy named Steve Shields. He called about 10 years ago and asked if I'd be interested in doing some sculpture for him. And I said, sure, and he told me what he wanted. And then he said he just wanted to buy the molds and cast them himself. I said, well, that's great, but we don't do that. But I said, I've got a lot of friends that would probably do that because it was a big project. And so I sent him the names of the other people, and about 3 months later, he called me back, said, I still want you and your brother to do them. I said, okay. And the price got higher. Anyway, every time he opens up a new store, he buys about a dozen pieces and puts them in front of the store. And it's a pretty good contract for us. But here you also, these are all the people that work with me, from the welders to the chasers. A couple of these guys have worked with me now for almost 35 years. This is my little brother Mark. He's worked with me for maybe a couple of weeks, I guess. Somebody asked me one day how many people work for me. I said about half of them. This one we did for the University of Pennsylvania, a guy named Red Grange.
Illinois.
University of Illinois, sorry. I'm still on Ben Franklin.
Okay.
Calvin, I'm nervous, okay?
Okay, I know. It's hard to hold it.
Yeah, I know it is. Anyway, this is Red Grange. I didn't get a chance to meet Red Grange. He was still alive when I was at school at Illinois, but it's always fun to watch him because when they have a football game, they line up the whole band in back of Red Grange, and I get to see him on TV. And one of these days, they'll mention my name. This is Robert Frost. I did Robert Frost for the Dartmouth University. That's the only school he went to, and he only went to school there for about a semester. But it was an interesting piece to do because we all knew him as an older Robert Frost, but he did most of his poetry when he was in his 20s and 30s. So I thought I'd do it then.
Did you have one of him in Atlanta?
Yes, there is one.
Agnes Scott, I think.
At Agnes Scott. And David, when you unveil a piece at Agnes Scott and you're sitting next to the president of Agnes Scott College, you don't ask her if this has always been an all-girls school, because she will say, no, these are all women. Excuse me. But yeah, it's a great place for it. He used to go down there and read his poetry every year. He'd jump off a train in Atlanta on his way to Florida, and I think that's probably how he paid his way. As a poet, I don't know that he made a lot of money, but he ended up with about 35 doctorates, I think, around different areas. You can still recite his poetry, can't you, David? Mr. Barker, can you still recite a poem of his?
No. I can barely say Robert Frost. I'm sure God.
I used to know one. How did it go? No. This is one. This is one I think is one of his best ones. Oh Lord, forgive my little joke on thee, and I'll forgive thy big one on me. Robert Frost. We did Abraham Lincoln. This went to the University of Illinois in Springfield. And it's a young Abraham Lincoln. That's when he was a lawyer. Most of these are just life-size pieces. This is one we just got finished about 3 years ago. We got a call from a guy in Omaha that said he was building a Catholic retreat and wondered if we could do 14 Stations of the Cross for him. He called a friend of mine down in southern Colorado first, and a friend of mine called me and said, George, he said, I'm not very fast at sculpting. He said, I can do one figure a year, and there's going to be probably 25 to 30 7-foot figures in these stations. So it's going to take me a long time. He said, we've only got a year and a half to do them. He said, how many do you think you could do up there in Loveland? I said, well, we could do the rest of them. So I put another 9 sculptors together, and we formed a team, and we all used similar models. We all worked in the same vein. Most everybody was pretty realistic. And we worked day and night and just had a great time sculpting all the stations. This is in between Lincoln and Omaha, right about the Ashland turn, I guess is where it is. Gretna exit. It's close to where you see that nice church that's on from the interstate, but that's not where it is. It's up the river a little bit. Anyway, it's called Cloisters on the Flat, and it's a wonderful afternoon. This is one we did of Davy Crockett for the Alamo. He's about 10 feet tall. We had a hold on him for a while because they started tearing down all the sculptures of all the slave owners, and they were a little worried that Davy Crockett might have been a slave owner, but he wasn't. It turns out that he was anti-slavery all the time. But that was a neat piece to do. I did it for an old collector friend of mine named Red McCombs, and when I was getting my gear together, I needed a Kentucky rifle, so I called up Red and I said, Red, do you have any Kentucky long rifles? He said, I don't know. He said, here's the name of my gun expert. So I called his gun expert. It was his gun curator, and I asked him, I said, Rob, I said, does Red have any Kentucky long rifles? He hesitated for a little bit, and he said, well, I'm pretty sure Red has the biggest collection of Kentucky long rifles in the world. I said, well, send me one that Davy Crockett might have taken to the Alamo. So he sent me a really beautiful Texas long rifle that I need to send it back to Red one of these days. Kind of like that spacesuit.
So natural.
Well, this is another one where I had some equipment I should have sent back. When the University of Illinois called me and asked me if I'd do Dick Butkus, I said sure. So I went out there and I found a helmet that they had in their department and got the helmet and the shoulder pads and brought them back. And then it was 4 or 5 years before we actually got going on the piece. So they forgot they had given me Dick Butkus's helmet. And then when I went back there and we installed the piece, like an idiot, I took the helmet back with me. I should have had Dick sign it. But that piece was a lot of fun too because I got to know Dick pretty well and Dick's family, and he wasn't quite as mean as people well, actually, he wants people to think that he's mean. I asked him what kind of face he wanted on the piece when we did it. He looked at me and said, I want this one. He goes, and you don't know if he's smiling or if he's going to eat you alive. But that's how big the piece is. You can see the clay piece over there on the left.
George, what scared you the most, the handshake or the hug?
Oh, with Dick? Well, he can barely stand up anymore. So.
But it still doesn't mean he can't hug you to death.
No, I don't think Dick Butkus ever hugged me.
You're lucky.
No, probably. But when you shake hands with him, it's like shaking hands with a ham. His hands are pretty big. This was a lot of fun to do. This one. This is the Apollo 11 guys that first landed on the moon. We did these for the Kennedy Space Center down at Cape Canaveral. And when we did this one, the best part was when Buzz Aldrin came out to see his. I thought maybe I had a picture of Buzz. Anyway, Buzz came out and we had him sitting right in the middle of it. He was looking up at himself. And he was a pretty good guy. We ended up meeting quite a few of the astronauts on this project, and then we did the Apollo 13 just this past year. In fact, Dennis was going to go down with me for the unveiling, and then they wouldn't let anybody in when we did the unveiling. So I had to tell Dennis he couldn't go. But they have microphones down there too.
So how many spacesuits do you have hanging in your closet?
Well, now these, I kept all of these spacesuits, but these aren't worth anything. These old flight suits. But we did get to know Hayes pretty well, and Jim Lovell's been a friend of ours for about 20 years since we did Jack Swagger. Jack Swagger, of course, died about 25 years ago. But Jim Lovell's, he came out to the studio a couple of times. He's a pretty good guy. And this is the last piece. This is a piece that we're doing right now. We just ordered one for the new Veterans Memorial here in Holdridge. And so we're going to be putting one up here probably Memorial Day this next year. So this is what I've done the last 50 years, and thank you. And Dennis is my new salesman, so if you guys want to buy anything, go talk to Dennis.
So if you know the right code, you can get 50% off.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
George is the one that holds that code, and I haven't been able to get it out of there.
Teresa has a question.
What's
Teresa.
the relationship between departure and Valentine?
Well, I did Valentine because when Phil Knight called me, that's the piece he wanted to put in front of his shoe store, the departure piece. And I sold all of those. So while on the phone call, I had to do a quick pivot and try to think, what might this guy like instead of this? And so I said, well, I've always wanted to do the same couple 50 years later. But I'd only thought of that at that time when I was on the phone. But it was quick enough that he went for it, and it worked out pretty well.
George he will never say this stuff, but he has an exhibition at Hastings College right now that's great. And it has those two together.
Oh, the small one, the model.
The small models. And he's being inducted into the Hastings College Hall of Fame this Sunday.
Yeah, that and $4, you get yourself a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Maybe.
No, it's nice. Hastings College has been really good to me. It's a great place for me to grow up.
How many sculptures you got in the streets of Hastings?
Oh, half a dozen maybe.
So that was yours that I saw this morning
Where?
in Hastings?
Well, maybe they had some other people's too.
Yeah. When I was traveling through, that's where my daughter works, and I stopped for, have lunch with her.
I usually take credit for it if somebody will say, is that
Well, that's good, it looked like your work.
Yeah, good.
George,
But, yeah.
can you tell us about the documentary for the Stations on the Front?
I don't know much about that. My son was just out, they hired him to clean them up because I guess they were pretty dirty. But, he cleaned them up this last week, and they've sent a film crew out there to do a documentary on the stations. But they haven't called me, so I'm ready to go. Just dust off my nose a little bit. Anyway, thank you guys. If you have any questions, I'll be here all week.
You have a picture of the big moose you did for that guy up in?
Oh, I forgot that.
Ah, I knew you would, because that's the piece I wanted to buy, George. Huh? I don't think I could afford that one because you couldn't get that statue through the door. No, it's a big monster. Guy wanted it for his winding driveway up to his big house he was building. But my driveway's already done.
Yeah, when these people call these days, I always ask them, where were you when I was 25 years old? Anyway, thank you guys. Thank Courtney for putting this all together. Oh, yeah.
I'm the other Bruce, so if two officers respond and you say Bruce, okay? Danita Russell is my spouse of 49 years, okay? And retired police officer, want to welcome back to Holdridge, enjoy the weekend here. And she knows that I know about as many as you that she does, so. After they put in the Promise of the Prairie, back in 20-some years ago, somebody decided they're gonna make patches for the police department on their uniforms and put these bigger ones on the sides of all the city vehicles. But nobody asked George. So.
Copyright problem.
So, anyway, he was gracious enough that we have given him some of these decals, and I don't know if we have any for the doors on bigger ones, but if you see a city vehicle, it's gonna have an emblem like this on it, okay? Well, this summer, something new, the military's been doing it for several years, and they have challenge coins. And so the Holders Police Department came out with their first challenge coin, which I'm gonna give to Dennis in a minute, or George. Dennis was a former chief, okay? I made bigger pictures of it, because I don't know if he'll share it or not, to let you look at it. On the front of it, it says, Holders Police Department, Nebraska, and it's got Promise of the Prairie, okay? On the back, on the outside, it says, integrity first, service, before self, and then, excellence in all we do. Now, it also says Captain 425. Who was a captain? This is a trivia question. Who was the captain whose badge number was 425? He was here from 1963 to 1985.
Ralph Edwards.
No, he was the chief. Merle Taylor, Captain Taylor, okay? He died suddenly of a fast-acting cancer, but it's got a captain and his badge number. When he died, we retired in badge number 425, okay? So, I would give you that, and, thank you.
Another copyright problem. No, I was driving back here to go hunting with Thumper about 15 years ago, and we were coming in at night, and for some reason I got pulled over. I was maybe doing 50.
That's a good start.
Yeah, I got pulled over just on the west side of town, and I had an attorney with me, and you remember those two guys I had with me that at the time? One was an attorney, the other was an idiot. So this policeman pulls over and starts, I know I'm gonna get a ticket, but the lawyer's saying, hey, George, I think he's been drinking, he's doing this and he's doing that. And the other guy said, what's that on your shoulder? And he looked over, and there was one of those patches on the cop's shoulder, and he said, do you know who did that sculpture that's on your patch? And the guy said, yeah, George Lundeen. He said, oh, hell, that's you.
And you told him there's a copyright issue on that badge.
Anyway, thank you very much.
And that copyright is gonna be way more than your ticket.
I didn't get it. No. But I think we did shoot Jimmy Weiser that day. Didn't you get a pellet in your tooth that day?
Yeah, out of my mouth.
It was Thumper. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the night.
No, you can talk, because there's probably just
Good thing I put this on in the drawer, that I don't have any.